What truly happens when loyalty collides with destiny on a tower high above the sleeping castle. The air bites with cold, torches flicker against stone, and somewhere in the dark, two minds sharpen like blades. You probably won't survive this, but you'll understand it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the base of the astronomy tower, neck craned upward, watching windows glow like tired eyes in Hogwarts' oldest face. The stone smells like centuries, that particular mixture of rain, moss, and the breath of 1,000 students who climbed these steps thinking they were immortal. The year is 1997, though time moves differently here, the way it does in dreams and old churches. Historians often point to the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 as the moment Europe learned that ideology and power make poor bedfellows. Yet here you are, watching that lesson play out again, with wands instead of swords. You take the first step upward, your hand trailing along stone worn smooth by nervous palms. And somewhere above, a choice is being made that will crack the world along lines already drawn. It's funny how towers always play the villain in these stories. Rapunzel's prison, Juliet's balcony, the place where Dumbledore kept his pensive and too many secrets. Some fringe historians argue that medieval towers weren't primarily defensive, but theatrical. Stages built to remind peasants, who literally looked down upon them. And you wonder if Rowena Ravenclaw knew that when she demanded the astronomy tower reach higher than sense suggested. The scholarly debate continues about whether Dumbledore planned every step or improvised brilliantly. But from here at the bottom looking up, it feels less like a plan and more like a prayer with footnotes. You climb, each step a small betrayal of the warmth below, and the war that's coming breathes coldly down the stairwell to meet you. You pause on the landing, catching your breath, and Harry Potter flickers through your mind like a film reel stuck on repeat. Cupboard, scar, letters falling like snow that the Dursleys couldn't shovel away fast enough. He was 11 once, which feels impossible now. A skinny kid who didn't know that famous and happy were different countries entirely. You see him in the Forbidden Forest during his first year, face to face with Voldemort's half-life leeching off a unicorn. And even then, even that young, he walked toward the danger instead of sprinting in any sensible direction. The Romans had a phrase, alea iacta est, the die is cast, which Julius Caesar allegedly declared when crossing the Rubicon in 49 BCE, committing to civil war. And Harry's been casting that die over and over since he chose to chase Snape's riddle past the flames. It's almost funny how many times he's technically died. The graveyard, the Department of Mysteries, the cave with the Inferi. Like he's been rehearsing for a final performance he doesn't know he's already been cast in. You think about the Dursleys' cupboard under the stairs, which some architectural historians note resembles the servants' nook common in Victorian homes. Tiny spaces designed to keep help invisible and silent. And you realize Petunia put Harry exactly where her world thought he belonged. The academic community remains divided on whether Harry's survival stems from his mother's love, or from deeper, older magics that Lily accidentally invoked. But standing here you think maybe it's simpler. Maybe he survived, because he never learned he was allowed to quit. You climb higher, and the tower narrows like a throat swallowing you upward. And somewhere in the dark, Harry is walking too, always walking, toward the forest, or the fight, or the end. And the joke nobody's laughing at is that he's 17 and carrying a war on shoulders that haven't finished growing. The torches gutter and spit, casting shadows that dance like the ghosts of all his almosts. all the times he nearly turned back, and didn't. And here you both are, climbing toward the same cold conclusion. You reach a window and press your palm against the glass, staring out toward the forbidden forest. That dark smudge on the horizon, where the trees grow so thick that even moonlight gives up and goes around. And you know that's where the real story turns, where Harry will walk barefoot through his own execution, because sometimes courage looks less like a roar, and more like putting one foot in front of the other when everything in you is screaming to run. The forest has always been Hogwarts' shadow self, the place where rules go to die and centaurs debate prophecy with the kind of certainty that comes from never having to actually do anything about it. And you step away from the window, but the forest follows you, creeping into your thoughts like fog under a door. In 1692, the Salem witch trials peaked with 19 hangings, a historical fact that reminds you how fear makes people do the math wrong, adding up evidence that doesn't exist to reach conclusions already written. And Voldemort's Death Eaters carry that same energy, convinced that blood purity is a science when it's really just a very old, very boring prejudice with a wand. You imagine Harry entering the forest, his pockets heavy with the resurrection stone, that strange artifact that some fringe archaeologists compare to sin-eater traditions in Welsh culture, where one person consumed ritual foods to absorb the dead's wrongdoings, because Harry's been eating everyone's sins since he was a baby. His parents, Dumbledore's, the wizarding world's cowardice, and now he's walking into the trees to swallow one more. The forest floor would be soft with centuries of rot, that rich decay that smells like endings and beginnings composting together. And you can almost hear the Death Eaters' laughter, sharp and bright. The sound people make when they're winning, but don't realize the game changed rules 3 moves ago. Scholars continue to argue whether Snape's information to Harry about being a Horcrux was a betrayal or a baptism, whether telling someone they must die is murder or mercy. But in the forest, under branches that block out stars and scents, Harry stops thinking in questions and starts thinking in steps. You see him turn the resurrection stone once, twice, 3 times, because magic always comes in 3s. Fairy godmothers, wishes, the number of times you can safely ignore a warning before it bites. And his parents materialize like breath on a cold window, visible but untouchable, close enough to break your heart, but not close enough to hold. His mother, Lily, looks at him with eyes that haven't aged a day past 21, which is its own violence, being forever young while your son grows older than you ever got to be. And she tells him he's been so brave, which is what you say when there's nothing left but the truth and the tragedy. James stands there trying to look fatherly, though he died before he learned how fathers age into the role. And Lupin and Sirius flank them like bookends to a story written in grief. And the joke that's not funny is that Harry's graduation present is a parade of ghosts telling him it's okay to die, which is either the worst pep talk in history or the only one that could possibly work. Some historians point to the Victorian fascination with death photography, preserving images of the deceased as if film could argue with finality. And Harry's resurrection stone is doing something similar, bringing back not the people but the idea of people, the shapes they made in the world. Warm shadows that can't hold him, but can walk him toward the clearing, where Voldemort waits like a bad ending that thinks it's inevitable. The academic debate persists about whether the resurrection stone truly summons souls or merely echoes, whether Harry spoke to his parents or to his need for his parents. But does it matter when the comfort is real, even if the ghosts are debatable? You watch him walk, and the forest watches too. Trees leaning in like an audience that's seen this play before. In different costumes, different centuries, the same ending. Someone young and good trading themselves for a world that will forget them by breakfast. Voldemort stands in the clearing, wand raised, Nagini coiling at his feet like a question mark made of scales and venom. and he looks at Harry with something almost like disappointment, as if he expected more from his destined enemy than this quiet surrender. This boy who doesn't even raise his wand. And you realize that Voldemort has spent so long fearing death that he can't recognize someone who's made peace with it. Can't comprehend that the opposite of his terror isn't bravery, but exhaustion. The kind that says, "Fine, let's get this over with," and means it. The killing curse leaves Voldemort's wand like a sigh. Green light that doesn't explode or thunder, but simply travels. Patient as a letter you've been expecting. And Harry closes his eyes, and the forest holds its breath. And somewhere a twig snaps under a Death Eater's boot, which is hilarious in a horrible way. That the sound accompanying Harry Potter's death is someone's awkward shuffle. Not a symphony or a scream, but a small, forgettable noise that no one will remember to write down. You blink, and you're somewhere else. Somewhere white and vast. Like a train station designed by someone who only understood architecture and theory. All light and clean lines and the persistent feeling that you've been here before. Maybe in a dream. Maybe in the moment between sleep and waking, when your brain hasn't decided if you're real yet. Harry lies on the ground. No, he's standing. No, both. Somehow occupying multiple states like Schrodinger's chosen one. And beneath a bench that shouldn't exist in this non-place, something small and wretched is whimpering. A flayed and broken thing that might have been a soul once, before it got shredded by ambition and dark magic, and the kind of loneliness that curdles into cruelty. That's Voldemort's soul fragment. The piece that lived in Harry's scar for 16 years like the world's worst tenant. And it's dying here in this liminal space which makes you think of purgatory. That medieval Catholic concept scholars trace back to the 12th century. A waiting room for souls too good for hell, but too stained for heaven. Though this place feels less like waiting and more like choosing. Dumbledore sits on a bench, looking impossibly clean for a man who died with a curse blackening his hand and secrets rotting his conscience. And he smiles at Harry with the kind of twinkle that either means, "I'm wise," or "I'm messing with you," and possibly both. The joke here is that even in death, even in whatever this place is, King's Cross Station rendered in metaphysical minimalism, Dumbledore can't stop being a teacher, can't resist one more lesson, one more gentle manipulation disguised as guidance. And Harry, who should probably be furious, just looks tired and asks questions, because that's what happens when someone raises you like a pig for slaughter. You keep hoping they had a good reason. Dumbledore explains about Horcruxes and Harry being one, about how Lily's sacrifice and Voldemort's hubris created a magic even Voldemort didn't understand, which tracks with the historical pattern of empires falling because they conquered more than they could comprehend. Rome, the Mongols, that kid in your school who took 8 AP classes and had a breakdown in April. Some fringe anthropologists argue that sacrificial magic appears in every culture because it taps into humanity's oldest deal with the universe. Equivalent exchange, nothing for nothing, blood for rain or a mother's life for her son's protection. And Lilith's sacrifice wasn't just love, but a contract signed in death that magic itself enforced. The scholarly debate continues about whether Dumbledore knew Harry would survive this encounter or merely hoped. Whether his plan was genius or a very educated guess wrapped in grandfatherly aesthetics. But Harry, standing in this bright nowhere, decides it doesn't matter because he's here now, and apparently not as dead as advertised. You watch him look at the thing under the bench, that pitiful scrap of Voldemort's soul, and Dumbledore says they can't help it, which is either profound or incredibly convenient, a way to avoid uncomfortable questions about redemption and who deserves it. In 1945, when the Nuremberg trials began, the world had to decide if monsters could be men, and if men could be held accountable for monstrous acts, a question that echoes here in this white space where a broken soul whimpers and no one reaches for it. And you wonder if Voldemort's tragedy, is that he became something even mercy couldn't touch. Or if the real tragedy is that no one tried hard enough, early enough, when he was still Tom Riddle, and the future wasn't yet written in corpses. Dumbledore tells Harry he can go back, that the choice is his, and you almost laugh because of course it is. Of course Harry Potter's afterlife comes with homework and a moral dilemma, because even dead he can't catch a break, can't just rest, has to decide if the world that took everything from him deserves him to give more. The white space hums with potential, with the buzz of a question waiting for an answer. And Harry thinks about his friends, about Hermione's hand gripping his in the dark, and Ron's awful jokes that somehow always landed when you needed them most, about Ginny who kissed him once like he was just a boy and not a prophecy. And the decision isn't hard, which is the saddest part. Of course he'll go back. Of course he'll walk back into pain and war, and a world that will demand explanations and heroism, and probably an interview with the Daily Prophet, because Harry Potter never learned how to save only himself, never developed the skill for partial sacrifice. And so you watch him turn away from peace, from rest, from the bright and quiet nothing where he could finally stop, and he chooses the noise, the blood, the castle full of people he barely knows, dying for a future he can't guarantee. Some scholars suggest that the hero's journey always includes a refusal of return, that reluctance to bring the prize back to the ordinary world. But Harry's journey is backwards. He refuses to stay, refuses rest. And maybe that's what makes him dangerous. Not his power, but his relentless, stupid, heartbreaking insistence on coming back, on trying again, on getting up when staying down would be so much easier, and no one could blame him. You feel the white space begin to fade. Or maybe Harry's fading from it. And Dumbledore's smile is the last thing to vanish. Like the Cheshire Cat, if the Cheshire Cat had a phoenix and a guilt complex. And then there's darkness, the smell of earth and crushed grass, and Harry's body lying in the Forbidden Forest, while Voldemort stands over him, triumphant and wrong, so catastrophically wrong that you can already see his ending written in his victory, because the thing about making your enemy into a legend is that legends don't stay dead. They just wait for the right moment to rewrite the ending. You stand in the forest clearing, and Voldemort is laughing, which might be the first genuine emotion he's expressed in decades that isn't anger or disdain. And it sounds wrong, like a rusted hinge pretending to be music. The laugh of someone who learned the mechanics but never understood the joy. He prods Harry's body with his foot, casual as checking if the roast is done, and announces to his Death Eaters that the boy who lived has finally died, which is great branding but terrible strategy because in every story ever told, the moment the villain celebrates is the moment he's already lost. He just doesn't know it yet. The Death Eaters cheer, masks glinting in wandlight, and you're struck by how much they resemble every other mob in history, the crowds at Roman executions, the revolutionaries at the guillotine, people who found belonging in shared cruelty, because it's easier than finding it in shared kindness. And in 1793, during the French Revolution's reign of terror, approximately 16,000 people were officially executed. A historical fact that reminds you how quickly righteousness curdles into murder when you're absolutely certain you're right. Voldemort orders Narcissa Malfoy to check if Harry's truly dead, which is darkly funny because he's asking a mother to confirm he's killed someone else's son. And Narcissa kneels, her blonde hair falling like a curtain between Harry and the Watchers. And she whispers, "Is Draco alive?" Because even here, even now, the only question that matters to her is the one written in her child's heartbeat. Harry breathes yes, so softly it's barely a word, more a ghost of air. And Narcissa lies, tells Voldemort that Harry Potter is dead, commits treason in a whisper, because some loves are stronger than fear, and you witness the moment the Dark Lord's perfect plan springs a leak he'll never see. A mother's defection so quiet it doesn't make a sound, but will echo into his ending. Some fringe psychologists argue that sociopaths aren't incapable of love, but incapable of recognizing it in others, blind to the motivations that drive normal human behavior. And Voldemort just proved the theory by trusting Narcissa's word without questioning what a mother might do, might lie, might betray, to get back to her son. The scholarly debate continues about whether Voldemort's inability to understand love is a magical consequence of his Horcruxes, or a psychological deficit that predated his dark magic chicken or egg, monster or man. But watching him parade through the forest with Harry's corpse levitated behind him like a prize catch, you think maybe it doesn't matter how he got broken, only that he never realized he was. He emerges from the forest as dawn breaks, because of course he does. Dramatic timing being apparently the one thing Dark Lords and theater majors have in common. And Hagrid is forced to carry Harry, weeping like the sky's falling, which it is. And the gathered defenders of Hogwarts see their hope floating lifeless, and something in the air just cracks, breaks clean through like ice under weight. Voldemort stands before the castle and offers terms: submit or die, kneel or fight. The same ultimatum every conqueror has offered since the first human picked up a rock and realized it made a decent argument. And in 1453, when Constantinople fell to Ottoman forces, Mehmed II offered similar terms, though at least he didn't have a snake the size of a sofa as a backup plan. The crowd before the castle is a portrait of grief, trying to decide if it's going to curdle into surrender or fury. And you can see the calculations happening behind every eye. The small betrayals people are considering, wondering if survival is worth kneeling, if dignity matters when you're dead. Questions that have haunted every occupied people from Gaul to Poland, to every small village that watched an army approach and had to choose between pride and breathing. Neville Longbottom steps forward, limping, bleeding from somewhere, everywhere, his face a mess of bruises that make him look like a Picasso painting titled, "Courage Having a Terrible Day." And Voldemort tries to recruit him, which is hilariously tone-deaf, like asking the ocean to kindly stop being wet. The Sorting Hat is placed on Neville's head as some kind of humiliation, dark magic making it burn. And you think about how the hat spent 1,000 years trying to divide students into neat categories: brave, smart, cunning, loyal, when the truth is, most people are a mess of contradictions held together by stubbornness and coffee. And Neville's about to prove that the bravest thing you can do is be exactly yourself when the world's on fire and everyone's watching. Some historians note that resistance movements throughout history often pivot on small, seemingly hopeless gestures. The White Rose pamphlets in Nazi Germany, Tank Man in Tiananmen Square. Moments when one person says no to a power that could erase them. And it matters not because it stops the power, but because it reminds everyone watching that no is still possible, still a word, still a choice. The hat burns and Neville reaches inside, which is either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid, that line being mostly a matter of outcome. And he pulls out Godric Gryffindor's sword, silver and sudden and sharp enough to cut through both snake scales and narrative inevitability. And in one motion, one swing, one defiant roar that probably hurt his bruised ribs, he kills Nagini, the last Horcrux, the final piece keeping Voldemort's soul chained to a body it should have abandoned decades ago. You feel it before you see it. The shift in the air, the way magic itself seems to exhale like it's been holding its breath. And Voldemort's face does something complicated. A flicker of confusion, fear, rage that passes too quickly to name but slow enough to savor, because he felt it too. The snapping of his last tether to immortality. And suddenly, he's just a man with a wand, mortal as a mayfly. And mortality is a country he hasn't visited since 1943. Harry moves, dropping the pretense of death, and chaos erupts like someone kicked over an anthill. Bodies running and spells flying and the careful battle lines dissolving into the beautiful mess of everyone fighting for the people next to them, instead of abstract principles, which is how wars are actually won. Not by ideology, but by refusing to let your friend die alone. The castle becomes a living thing. Corridors shifting and stairs betraying Death Eaters because Hogwarts has always played favorites, and apparently, with 1,000 years of housing children, makes you protective in ways that transcend stone and mortar. And suits of armor march into battle swinging swords at knee height, which is frankly hilarious. Medieval leftovers joining a magical war with the energy of grandpas, who refuse to admit they're too old for this. You follow Harry as he runs through the fighting, invisible under his cloak. And he's hunting Voldemort, but also looking for Ron and Hermione. Because even now, even with the fate of the world doing its dramatic finale thing, he can't stop being a boy who needs to know his friends are breathing. In 1815, at Waterloo, Napoleon's defeat came partly from miscommunication and partly from timing, from forces arriving at the exact right moment to tip the scales. A historical fact that resonates here as reinforcements flood into Hogwarts. Families, villagers, even the Slytherins who left returning with Slughorn. Proving that people are complex and brave in inconvenient ways that don't fit neat narratives. Some fringe military historians argue that battles are won in the moments before fighting starts, in positioning and morale and whether your soldiers believe the cause is worth their bones. And Hogwarts defenders believe in the castle and each other, and the idea that a school should be safe, should be sacred, should not echo with curses and screaming. And that belief makes them dangerous in ways Voldemort never calculated. The scholarly debate persists about whether the Elder Wand's allegiance changed when Draco disarmed Dumbledore, or when Harry disarmed Draco, whether the wand follows power or technicality, intent or action. But the wand knows, recognizes Harry, even though Voldemort holds it, because ownership is about connection, not possession. A lesson capitalism still hasn't learned. And Voldemort never will. You watch Voldemort duel McGonagall, Slughorn, and Kingsley simultaneously, holding his own because he's still terrifyingly powerful. Still the wizard who made the world whisper his name in fear. But there's something frantic in his movements now. The performance of a man who feels the floor dropping and is pretending he meant to fall. Harry finds Ron and Hermione coming from the Chamber of Secrets, drenched and carrying basilisk fangs, and they're grinning like maniacs because they just destroyed Hufflepuff's cup. Another Horcrux, which was already dead technically, but they didn't know Nagini was handled. And the redundancy is beautiful. The way love overcompensates. Does the job twice, to be sure. They tell Harry about the Room of Requirement burning, about Crabbe dying in fiend fire he couldn't control. And the joke that's not funny is that dark magic is the easiest thing to start and the hardest thing to stop, like fascism or a land war in Asia. And every generation has to relearn that power without wisdom just eats itself eventually. The three of them move through the castle together, and you're struck by how they don't match. Hermione with her brilliant, anxious mind. Ron with his heart bigger than his confidence. Harry with his death wish and determination. But they fit. Complete each other's sentences and spells. And in 1969, the Apollo 11 crew landed on the moon because 3 people trusted each other in a tin can, hurtling through space. A reminder that the biggest impossible things happen when people believe in each other more than they fear the odds. Some anthropologists suggest that the power of 3 appears in human storytelling, because it's the smallest number that feels like a group, not a pair but a unit, stable like a tripod. And watching them now, wands out, backs to each other. You see why every fairy tale and prophecy and ancient spell comes in 3s. Voldemort's voice booms through the castle, magnified by magic, calling for a pause, for Harry to surrender himself or watch everyone die. And it's manipulation. Theater. The desperate gambit of someone who feels control slipping and reaches for fear because it's worked before, always worked before. Why isn't it working now? Harry makes for the Great Hall, where the voice originated. And his friends follow because of course they do. Because you don't love someone for 17 years and let them face the monster alone, even when they're walking towards something that looks like ending, smells like sacrifice, tastes like all the stories where the hero dies and everyone pretends it was noble instead of tragic. You enter the Great Hall and it's wrecked, beautiful and ruined, the ceiling still showing sky, but the floor cracked and bloodied, bodies covered with robes and jackets, and the living huddle around the dead like parentheses around a sentence no one wanted to write. And in the center, Voldemort stands with his stolen wand, looking almost human in his desperation, almost pitiable if you could forget the decades of murder, which you can't, shouldn't. One quote T. Dot. You stand at the edge of the Great Hall, and the silence is the kind that comes after screaming. After hours of battle when everyone's voice is raw and their ears ring with curses, and the absence of sound feels like pressure, like the air before a thunderstorm deciding whether to break or just threaten forever. Weasleys huddle around Fred's body, and Molly's face is a ruin of grief that's going to calcify into fury, into the kind of rage that makes mothers lift cars off trapped children or duel Bellatrix Lestrange to actual death. Because if you think a father's vengeance is scary, you've never seen what a mother does when you touch her children, any of her children, even the ones she's adopted in spirit like Harry and Hermione. Lupin and Tonks lie together, which is romantic in the worst way. The way that makes you want to scream at the unfairness because they just had a baby, just started the life they fought for. And some editorial historians argue that war's real body count includes all the futures that die with the people, all the children never born, books never written, ordinary Tuesdays never lived. And looking at them, you feel the weight of every ordinary day they'll never have. Lavender Brown is being tended to by Hermione. And there's something quietly devastating about Hermione saving the girl who made her 6th year miserable, because that's what separating the good from the bad looks like in practice. Not grand gestures, but small mercies extended to people who don't deserve them, which is everyone, which is the point. You see Malfoy in the corner with his parents, and they look lost, like people who bet everything on red, and the wheel came up black. And Draco's face is the picture of someone realizing that the winning side isn't always the right side, and the right side doesn't always win, both things being true, neither being comfortable. In 1865, when the American Civil War ended, the question wasn't just who won, but how to stitch a country back together when half of it had been willing to die rather than change. A historical fact that resonates here in the Great Hall, where Death Eaters and Defenders eye each other across bodies in broken stone. And you wonder how you build peace with people who killed your friends, how you share a future with someone who tried to erase yours. Questions without easy answers, only necessary ones. Some fringe sociologists study post-conflict reconciliation and note that communities heal not by forgetting but by choosing, daily, hourly, to be neighbors again, to let the grocer's son who wore the wrong uniform sell you bread, to wave at the woman whose husband cast the curse that killed your sister. Small agonies in service of a larger survival. And Hogwarts is about to become a laboratory for that kind of pain. The scholarly debate continues about whether true forgiveness requires forgetting, whether you can build a society on controlled resentment, or if eventually someone has to let go, has to decide that their child's future matters more than their own revenge. But standing here looking at Molly's face, you think some things don't get forgiven, just endured, just carried until the weight becomes part of your skeleton. and you learn to walk with it. Voldemort breaks the silence, offering terms again, and his voice cracks just slightly on Harry Potter, which you might miss if you weren't listening for it. The tiny fissure in his certainty, because Nagini's dead, and the wand in his hand feels wrong, doesn't sing to his magic the way it should. And somewhere deep in his stunted soul, he feels the shape of his miscalculation, without understanding its dimensions. Harry steps forward, drops the cloak, and the hall gasps like one organism, shock and hope and terror mixing into a sound you feel in your chest. And Voldemort's face does that complicated thing again. The micro-expression of a man watching his victory develop cracks in real time. They start talking, which is hilarious in a way. After all the murder and Horcruxes and decades of war, they're just two guys having a conversation in a trashed hall at dawn, like every argument that ever happened at a party that went too late. Except one of them is a genocidal maniac, and the other is a teenager who's seen too much and slept too little. Harry explains about the wand, about Draco disarming Dumbledore, about how Voldemort killed Snape for nothing, for a loyalty that had already left. And you can see Voldemort processing this, trying to fit it into his understanding of magic, of power. But he can't because his understanding has a Voldemort-shaped hole in it. An inability to comprehend that some things can't be taken, only given. And the Elder Wand never gave itself to him. Never bowed. Never recognized a man who only knew how to conquer. Never learned how to connect. In 1912, the Titanic sank partly because the designers couldn't imagine their unsinkable ship sinking. So they didn't plan for it. Didn't include enough lifeboats. And Voldemort's the same. Built his entire existence on immortality, without a backup plan, for being wrong, for being mortal, for being just Tom Riddle with delusions and a wand that won't work right. Some scholars of magical theory, if we're pretending that's a real field, debate whether wands have consciousness or just complex reactive enchantments, whether the Elder Wand chose Harry or simply followed rules about defeat and ownership. But the wand doesn't care about the terminology, knows what it knows, wants who it wants. And it wants the boy who disarmed its previous master, not the man who murdered an irrelevant snake keeper. Voldemort raises the Elder Wand, and Harry raises his. Draco's Hawthorn wand, taken in a scuffle at Malfoy Manor, nothing legendary, just a wand doing its job. And you feel the moment stretch like taffy, like the universe is holding its breath to see how its story ends. And they cast simultaneously Avada Kedavra and Expelliarmus, death and disarmament, the alpha and omega of their relationship, the way they've always met, with Voldemort trying to kill and Harry trying to survive. And the spells collide in a shower of gold that looks like every prior connection they've had, priori incantatum on a cosmic scale, and the Elder Wand knows, feels its true master calling. And it does what wands do, what love does, what loyalty does when tested. It refuses. The Elder Wand will not kill its master, won't channel Voldemort's murder into Harry's chest. And the killing curse rebounds, green light making a U-turn. And Voldemort has just enough time to look surprised, which is generous of physics, to give him that split second of understanding that he was wrong, that he lost, that the boy he couldn't kill at 1-year-old just beat him at 17, not with power, but with a better understanding of the rules,
of magic,
of the central truth that Voldemort spent a lifetime refusing, that some things matter more than survival, and those things make you stronger than fear ever could. You watch Voldemort fall, and it's anticlimactic in the way true endings often are. Not an explosion or a dramatic speech, but just a body crumpling, becoming a corpse, ordinary and finished. And the Dark Lord who terrorized the world for decades dies like everyone dies, stops breathing, stops being, becomes a problem for whoever has to move the body and decide what you do with the remains of a legend. The silence lasts exactly one heartbeat, maybe two, and then the hall erupts. Noise and joy and crying and laughter, all mixed into a sound that's pure relief. The exhale of a community that's been holding its breath for years. And people are hugging, crushing each other. And someone's kissing someone they've secretly loved through 3 years of battle, because if not now, when? If not at the end of the world, then what are you waiting for? You see Ron and Hermione holding hands like if they let go the reality will change. And Neville's being mobbed by people who spent 6 years thinking he was useless, and one day realizing he's the reason they're alive, which must be a very complicated feeling. Vindication and whiplash mixed with, I told you so, that he's too kind to voice but definitely thinking. George is laughing and crying over Fred's body, and it's the saddest sound you've ever heard. Joy and grief occupying the same space. Because he won, but half of him is gone. And how do you explain to people that victory doesn't feel like you thought it would when you're burying your twin, your other half? The person who made every joke funnier and every silence comfortable. You watch Voldemort fall, and it's anticlimactic in the way true endings often are. Not an explosion or a dramatic speech, but just a body crumbling, becoming a corpse, ordinary and finished. And the Dark Lord who terrorized the world for decades dies like everyone dies. Stops breathing, stops being, becomes a problem for whoever has to move the body and decide what you do with the remains of a legend. The silence lasts exactly one heartbeat, maybe two, and then the hall erupts. Noise and joy and crying and laughter, all mixed into a sound that's pure relief. The exhale of a community that's been holding its breath for years. And people are hugging, crushing each other, and someone's kissing someone they've secretly loved through 3 years of battle. Because if not now, when? If not at the end of the world, then what are you waiting for? You see Ron and Hermione holding hands like, if they let go the reality will change. And Neville's being mobbed by people who spent 6 years thinking he was useless. And one day realizing he's the reason they're alive. Which must be a very complicated feeling. Vindication and whiplash mixed with, I told you so, that he's too kind to voice but definitely thinking. George is laughing and crying over Fred's body, and it's the saddest sound you've ever heard. Joy and grief occupying the same space, because he won but half of him is gone. And how do you explain to people that victory doesn't feel like you thought it would, when you're burying your twin, your other half, the person who made every joke funnier and every silence comfortable? In 1945, when World War II ended, celebrations erupted globally. People dancing in streets still cratered by bombs, kissing strangers, crying into the shoulders of anyone nearby. But the next morning they woke up, and the dead were still dead. The cities still rubble, and the work of rebuilding stretched out like a road with no visible end. A historical fact that Hogwarts is about to learn intimately. Some psychologists specializing in trauma note that survivors often feel guilt before relief. A complicated tangle of why me, why not them? And you can see it in Harry's face as people try to thank him, touch him, claim him as their savior, when all he feels is tired and sad, and aware that he's standing while Lupin isn't. While Fred isn't. While Colin Creevey, just a kid with a camera and too much hero worship, isn't. The scholarly debate continues about whether Voldemort's Horcruxes were a brilliant innovation or a fundamental misunderstanding of magic's nature. Whether splitting the soul grants immortality or just delays a death that comes more completely for the waiting. But looking at his body, ordinary and empty, you think the answer is simpler. He lived a long time and died anyway. Spent decades afraid of death and met it in the end like everyone does. Making all that murder and paranoia not evil genius but just evil. Just a waste. Just a man so afraid of ending that he never actually lived. You move through the celebrating crowd, and it parts around Harry like water. people wanting to be near him, but afraid to touch. Like he's holy or fragile or both. And he makes his way to Ron and Hermione, his people, his home, and they don't say anything. Because what do you say when you've saved the world before breakfast, and your adrenaline is crashing, and your best friend's brother is dead on the floor? Kingsley is already organizing. Because someone has to. Someone always has to be the adult who thinks about next steps, while everyone else is feeling their feelings. And he's sending Patronuses, coordinating with St. Mungo's, making lists of the dead, and missing with the grim efficiency of a man who knows that grief is a luxury you schedule after the triage. In 1906, after the San Francisco earthquake, survivors began rebuilding before the fires were fully out. Because humans are stubborn and forward-focused and surprisingly bad at letting catastrophe be the end of the story. And Hogwarts is already showing that resilience. Students riding chairs, vanishing blood, collecting wands from the fallen with reverent care. Small actions that say, we're still here, we continue. We choose the next chapter even if we didn't choose this one. Some anthropologists argue that communal recovery rituals, funerals, memorials, shared meals, serve not just to honor the dead, but to remind the living there's still a community, still connected, still responsible to and for each other. And you watch as someone starts arranging bodies with more care, closing eyes, straightening limbs, performing the small dignities that separate us from animals and monsters, that say even in death, especially in death, you mattered. You were human. You were ours. McGonagall looks about 1,000 years old, her hair escaping its bun, her robes torn, but she's directing repairs to the castle with the same brisk authority she used for Transfiguration homework, because Hogwarts is hers now, her responsibility, her school to rebuild. And she'll be damned if she lets it stay broken, if she lets Voldemort's last impact be permanent scars on her stone and students. The house tables in the Great Hall are shattered, the four-way division literally broken. And you wonder if they'll rebuild them or leave them mixed, whether Hogwarts will go back to sorting children into boxes, or if war taught them that the boxes were always more like suggestions, that Gryffindors can be smart and Slytherins brave, and maybe possibly the Sorting Hat's been creating division as much as reflecting it. A debate for another day, for a staff meeting months from now when the immediate crisis is over, and they have energy for philosophy. Harry slips away, and you follow him, understanding the need to escape the gratitude, the eyes, the weight of being the boy who lived twice, who died and came back, who ended the war with a disarming charm and knowledge stolen from a half-blood prince. And he climbs stairs without seeing them, muscle memory taking him to Gryffindor Tower, to the common room that's empty because everyone's either dead or celebrating. And he collapses on a couch that smells like home, like 6 years of laughter and homework, and the particular scent of a fireplace that's been warming the same room for centuries. Sleep takes him like a predator, sudden and absolute. And you watch him dream. Rapid eye movement, small flinches, the processing of trauma in real time. And you hope his dreams are kind, are soft, are filled with his parents and Sirius, and everyone he's lost telling him it's okay to rest now. The job is done. The war is over. And he can just be Harry. Just be 17. Just be a boy who needs about 14 hours of sleep, and a therapist, and a long, boring summer with nothing trying to kill him. The morning sun fills the common room with amber light, and dust motes dance in the beams like tiny stars. And outside, the world is figuring out how to be post-Voldemort, how to rebuild and reconcile and explain to children why half their teachers are gone. But in here, in this moment, there's just a boy sleeping, and the quiet certainty that he'll wake up, that he gets to wake up, that this time, finally, he survived not for a sequel, but for an actual life. And that's its own kind of magic. The ordinary, extraordinary gift of a future. You stand in the headmaster's office 3 weeks later, and it looks different in the daytime. Less like a wizard's fever dream, and more like an extremely cluttered study belonging to someone who never met a knick-knack they didn't want to adopt. And Harry's here to talk to Dumbledore's portrait, which is either closure or the wizarding world's version of therapy, though possibly both. The portrait Dumbledore looks apologetic, which is new. Death apparently granting him perspective he lacked when he was busy manipulating teenagers for the greater good. And Harry asks the questions he's needed to ask. Why didn't you tell me? Why did it have to be me? Did you know I'd survive, or was I just your best guess in a losing game? And the portrait answers with the kind of honesty that living Dumbledore rarely managed, admitting doubt, admitting fear, admitting that he was a brilliant man who made decisions with other people's lives because someone had to, and he thought he was smart enough to get it right, which is how most tragedies start, with intelligent people certain their intelligence is enough. In 1945, Allied leaders made decisions at Yalta that shaped the Cold War, dividing Europe with lines on maps, certain they were building peace when they were really just choosing the next conflict's boundaries. A historical fact that reminds you how often the powerful confuse winning with wisdom, strategy with morality. Some philosophers argue that consequentialism, judging actions by outcomes, is fundamentally flawed because we can't know outcomes, can't see the future, can only make best guesses, and hope our intentions matter when the results go sideways. And Dumbledore's portrait embodies that debate. A man whose plan worked, but who can't fully defend the ethics of treating Harry like a chess piece, even a crucial one, even the one that checkmates the king. Harry asks about the Hallows, about the invisibility cloak and resurrection stone and elder wand, the three objects that supposedly made someone master of death, which sounds impressive until you realize master of death just means you've accepted it, made peace with it, stopped running from the one finish line everyone crosses. And that's less about magic objects and more about growing up, which is its own kind of magic, darker and slower and absolutely unavoidable. The cloak is his, always was, a Potter family heirloom that came from the Peverells, because apparently Harry can't just have regular hand-me-downs. Has to inherit mythological artifacts with his dad's old sweaters. And he's keeping it, because it's useful and sentimental. And also because invisibility is a nice option when you're famous and tired and want to go to Diagon Alley without 60 people asking for autographs. The stone he dropped in the Forbidden Forest, left it where he fell, and he's not going back for it because bringing back echoes of the dead is how you stop living with the living. How you become a ghost in your own life, haunting the past instead of building a future. And Harry's done enough haunting, has been haunted enough, needs to learn how to exist in the present tense without checking over his shoulder for corpses or prophecies. The Elder Wand is complicated, because it's powerful and dangerous, and currently his by right of conquest. And some people, Hermione, several oars, that one reporter from the Prophet who won't leave him alone, think he should destroy it, snap it in half, and end the cycle of murder and theft that's followed the wand for centuries. But others argue it could be useful, could protect him, could be the ultimate insurance policy in a world that's proven it wants him dead, at least once a year on average. The scholarly debate rages in magical academic circles. If those exist, if wizards have universities or just apprenticeships and on-the-job training, about whether the Elder Wand is inherently corrupting or simply powerful, whether it makes users evil or evil users seek it. Chicken, egg, wand, corpse. Harry listens to himself think, which is new, which is what happens when you're not running or fighting or dying. You suddenly have time for introspection, and it's uncomfortable. Like muscles you haven't used atrophying during the war, and he decides he doesn't want it. doesn't want the most powerful wand in existence because power is what Voldemort wanted. What every dark wizard wants. And Harry's spent enough time being defined by what Voldemort wanted. Choosing opposites seems like a good starting philosophy for the rest of his life. He tells Portrait Dumbledore he's going to return the wand to Dumbledore's tomb. Let it die with its last true master. Dumbledore defeated by Draco, but the wand's loyalty running deeper to the man who held it longest, who it chose in some way that matters more than technicality. And if Harry dies undefeated, the wand's power dies too, breaks the chain, ends the story, turns the Deathly Hallow back into just a stick of elderwood with a thestral hair core. Impressive, but not worth killing for. Portrait Dumbledore smiles like Harry just passed a test he didn't know he was taking. Which is annoying, because even dead Dumbledore can't stop being a teacher. Can't stop setting up moral quandaries and looking pleased when you solve them the way he hoped you would. But Harry's too tired to be annoyed. Feels more like relief. Like he made the right choice and someone he respected confirmed it. And he's 17 and allowed to still need that confirmation sometimes. Allowed to want the adult to say, yes, good, you did well. In 1816, Mary Shelley began writing Frankenstein, a novel about a man who gained the power to create life and was destroyed by it, by his inability to handle what his ambition built. And the Elder Wand is similar, a tool that promises mastery but delivers obsession. And Harry's choosing to be the person who walks away from the power, who says no thank you to the cursed artifact, which is character development, which is what happens when you survive your own story and have to decide who you'll be in the epilogue. Some fringe historians of magic, and we're really stretching the definition of historian here, argue that the Peveril brothers' story is a cautionary tale about the different ways humans relate to death. Fighting it, denying it, or accepting it. And the cloak represents acceptance, the stone denial, the wand fighting, and Harry's keeping acceptance, discarding denial, and neutralizing the fight. Which is emotionally tidy in a way real life rarely is, but symbolically satisfying. You watch him leave the office, descend the spiral staircase for maybe the last time because he's not coming back to Hogwarts next year. Can't imagine sitting in potions class learning about bezoars when he's used them to save lives. Can't go back to being a student. When he's been a soldier, a sacrifice, a savior. And the school understands. Gives him and Ron and Hermione a special dispensation to skip 7th year. Take their newts by exam. Get on with their lives because they've earned it. Paid for it in ways that transcend tuition. He walks to Dumbledore's tomb. The white marble mausoleum on the grounds that seems excessive for a man who claimed to prefer simple woolen socks. And he opens it. Because he's the Elder Wand's master, it allows him. And places the wand back in Dumbledore's crossed hands, and the tomb seals. And that's it. The most powerful wand in existence tucked away with a corpse, neutralized by choice, by a 17-year-old choosing peace over power. And if that's not magic, you don't know what is. You find Harry by the lake 3 months later, and summer's been kind to him, put some weight back on his bones, some color in his face that isn't bruises or exhaustion, and he's skipping stones across the black water, watching the giant squid's tentacles swirl lazily near the surface. And the world feels soft-edged and possible in the way late August does when you're young, and the future is still more promise than threat. He's living with the Weasleys at the Burrow. Has his own room for the first time in his life. Actual space that's his. Not a cupboard or a shared dormitory, but a place where he can close the door and breathe. And no one needs him to be anything but Harry. Just Harry. The boy who likes Quidditch and treacle tart, and sitting by lakes thinking about nothing in particular. Hermione's been to Australia and back, found her parents, restored their memories. And she doesn't talk about how angry they were. How betrayed they felt that she stole their lives even to save them. but you can see it in the careful way she mentions them. The guilt that lingers like a watermark behind every smile. Faint, but permanent. Ron pretends not to notice, though he squeezes her hand a little tighter when she drifts quiet. The war's over, but none of them are quite sure what peace is supposed to feel like. Maybe this. Just breathing, together, finally still.